Welcome to today's webinar, Discover How Your CELPIP Test Responses Are Evaluated, a conversation with a CELPIP expert. My name is Riley Cohen. I'm the CEO of CanadaVisa. And today we are excited to have CELPIP with us to provide an inside look into how your test responses are evaluated using the CELPIP Score Comparison Chart. Understanding how your test will be scored is a great way to help you prepare to perform well on your test day. The CELPIP test is developed by language experts in Canada and is officially recognized by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, as proof of English language proficiency for permanent residency and as proof of English language proficiency for Canadian citizenship. We are today very happy to welcome a regular of ours, Ivan Petrov from CELPIP. Ivan is the Manager of Business Development for Prometrics Language Acquisition Portfolio for Western Canada and the United States in Asia. As Manager of Business Development, Ivan supports the assessment mandates of academic institutions, governments, and strategic stakeholders, focusing on improving meaningful and equitable outcomes for institutions and learners. In the past, Ivan served as an account director and manager of academic relations for Prometrics English Language and prior learning assessment programs, and spent years working in experimental learning and EdTech, focusing on the US academic ecosystem, public policy, and academia. Ivan holds a BA from the University of Toronto and MA from the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs. Ivan, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Ivan today will present for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to move on to the question and answer section. Many of you have submitted questions prior to this webinar. We're going to get to as many questions as we can in the later half of this webinar portion. But please, throughout the presentation, whatever questions you may have, post them in the chat. They're going to be monitored by our team of moderators, and we'll try to get to as many of those relevant questions at the end as well. Please refrain from sharing any personal information, such as your email or phone number. The chat is public and other people can see it. And lastly, note that this webinar is being recorded. So afterwards, you'll receive a recording of the webinar and a PDF of the slides in your email in case you want to review or you missed a section of this webinar. So without further ado, thank you, Ivan, once again, and I'm going to hand it off to you to present.
Much appreciated, Riley. It is always an incredible opportunity to connect with folks globally. I can't tell you how excited I always get about speaking to folks from all corners of the world. And as I always like to say about myself, sometimes I think I'm a citizen of the world, but there's always a country that I'm not familiar with that pops up on these chats. So exceptionally grateful, and Riley and team, always happy to be in the same room with you. Without further ado, Riley already mentioned what CELPIP is and what it stands for. So I will try to give you, for those of you who are unfamiliar, we're going to go through a couple of overview slides that effectively dispel any misconceptions, preconceptions that you may have already had. First and foremost, what CELPIP stands for, in case you were wondering, it stands for the Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program. And the first three letters here are the most important ones, i.e. Canadian English Language. This is the only all-Canadian exam accepted by IRCC for permanent residency and citizenship applications. It's fully computer delivered, and it assesses all 4 language skills. There is a version which I will show you in a moment that assesses only 2, and this one, as Riley mentioned, is also accepted by IRCC for citizenship applications. Importantly, before we move on to other slides, CELPIP focuses on functional proficiency, which means that it assesses a candidate's ability to use English language in day-to-day situations. And while some of the situations may involve an academic context or a workplace context, it's important to understand that CELPIP is not a test for academic or business English. So it features a range of levels of formality, with some being quite casual, such as reading an email from a family member or listening to a chat between coworkers, while others are a bit more formal, such as responding to a survey from a city government, for example. In other words, it really prepares you for what you would expect in everyday situations in Canada specifically. And importantly, it was also developed by language experts at the University of British Columbia. There are two versions of the test. One, the CELPIP General, accepted by RSCC for permanent residency, as well as accepted for other certification purposes by a number of institutions and organizations, governing bodies in Canada, whereas the CELPIP General LS is only accepted for proof of language proficiency for citizenship applications. The CELPIP General LS only tests listening and speaking, and therefore takes about an hour and 10 minutes, whereas the CELPIP General is obviously a longer test, takes about 3 hours to complete. In terms of availability, CELPIP is really well positioned across many regions in the world with up to, well, more than 150 test centers at this point. A lot of the questions that we typically get on these webinars is whether CELPIP will be available in a particular jurisdiction. And the short answer to that is it's growing, and it's growing quickly. So next time we meet, for instance, there may be a location near you. But one of the things that I always encourage folks to do is check CELPIP.ca and find the nearest testing location. Again, a number of locations available worldwide, and many more, of course, in Canada. So for instance, if you were to look at some of these territories, you realize that there's 18 locations in BC, 8 in Alberta, more than 20 in Ontario for those of you who are here, and again, well represented in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Very briefly, what, in a nutshell, is CELPIP, and why do we regard it so well as the preeminent Canadian test? It is the only one that's made in Canada by Canadian English language experts. It is computer delivered, which nowadays everything is, but the reason why we make the distinction is because there are some instances in which a paper test may be required. So important to note that the computer delivered portion also means that it is supremely convenient. And it also means that in most cases, you can take the entire test in one sitting. In other words, you don't have to come back and do, let's say, a speaking portion at a later date or at a later time at the same date of examination. You do it all in one fell swoop. Obviously, quick online results that you can get directly in your online account as soon as you join CELPIP.ca. The timing now is typically 3 to 4 days from the time that you tested, and that's calendar days as opposed to business days. So a fairly quick turnaround time that is also making things convenient for everyone. Again, I mentioned the one sitting component. That's very crucial in terms of the convenience side of things. But there's another part here that I think is also important, and that is, and we get those questions a lot, you're not, for the speaking portion of the test, you're not speaking directly to another person. Even though another person rates your speaking responses at a later date, the importance here is that you're not making eye contact, or you're not seeing somebody else's body language, which then in turn, for some of us who are a little bit apprehensive about these things, may present a bit of a challenge in terms of how we answer, because sometimes you get swayed by just a raised eyebrow, for instance. So the point here is that you're going to record your speaking responses. They will be rated at a later date, but this is probably the best way that you can ensure that you are focusing on the content of your responses rather than being influenced by certain social cues that may be present if there was a person on the other side of the screen. CELPIP is also Canadian in other ways, and not the fact that just apart from the fact that it was developed here, it's also crucial to understand that it actually uses Canadian accents in listening passages, which there's a important reason why this was developed in the onset, and that is Canadian accents tend to be very neutral, as it were, if you were to take a linguistic continuum of various English language pronunciations across the world. So easy to prepare, but also for those of you who are applying from abroad, it gives you a really good understanding of what you are about to encounter in the Canadian context, which from strictly speaking, you know, an edifying or a teaching experience, you really are getting a great primer for how you are, for the vicissitudes of language use in Canada. And conversely, the folks who are already in Canada, already familiar with how these how language use sounds here in this country, you already have a level of confidence that may help you on the test. We already mentioned a moment ago that CELPIP is accepted, obviously, by IRCC for various pathways, citizenship, as well as permanent residence applications. Importantly, as of August of last year, CELPIP is also accepted for the student direct stream pathway. In other words, for those of you who may be, for instance, considering processing a study permit, for instance, for certain international students. And obviously, the point there is that some of these, the SDS program would allow for your study permit to be fast-tracked within 20 days. You can use CELPIP for that as well. So in other words, one score on CELPIP gives you exposure to a number of modalities for applications, study permits through the SDS pathway, IRCC, as well as professional designation. Importantly, for the SDS program, the best source of information regarding the countries that are part of the SDS pathway, obviously, is IRCC. So I encourage everyone who may be interested in submitting a study permit application to go there, check this out, and know that CELPIP is well positioned to get you there. Finally, I keep mentioning all the professional organizations that accept CELPIP scores. This is just a tiny snippet of those. The full list is at celpip.ca, so encourage folks who may be considering immigrating to Canada and working in a particular profession being designated by these organizations to go through the full list and make sure that whatever organization you're applying to get a designation from, ask them whether they accept CELPIP, because again, one score can give you exposure to all of these various modalities of applications. We're going to start getting a little bit into the vicissitudes of what constitutes a good score and how we get there. Wanted to just position everyone with this particular slide and just say a couple of things about the importance of it. On the left, you see the CELPIP levels that measure your proficiency in all 4 skills. There's a little descriptor in the middle, and then to the right is the CLB level. So the CLB level is the level used by IRCC across which you can delineate the level of proficiency required for individual particular applications and application streams. In most cases, folks would be required to score at least a 5 on CLB. In many instances, that will be a 7. And of course, for there's a component, obviously, for instance, study permits and so forth, that would require 9+. And for those of you looking at this slide deck at a later date, remember this one and refer back to it because it's going to give you an indication of what we're going to talk about in a moment and how everything that we talk about and prepare you for is aligned very neatly across these CLB and CELPIP levels. The important thing to consider here is CLB equals CELPIP level. You don't have to wonder at what level of a CLB your CELPIP level should be, in a way. So with that, we'll move along. Just a very small sample of a particular score report that gives you an indication of what you're going to receive when you conduct your exam, and a little bit about the test information. As we said a moment ago, right, there are two formats of the CELPIP test. One is the general, the other one is the general LS. This is a helpful slide to retain for later if you have any questions about exactly what these features of the test look like and how long it takes to complete them. This is a very useful slide to retain for future reference. I'll just mention a couple of important things here. The timing for the individual components is outlined at the very bottom. So when you're preparing, please internalize that information and know that, for instance, listening is about an hour. Reading can be, depending on your proficiency, between half an hour to an hour. Writing is almost always close to an hour, and speaking is between 15 and 20 minutes. I've also included the actual test format and the component features, as well as an outline of how many questions per component are on the test itself. I will skip through these and kind of leave them here for your reference as we go along, because I want to get to the section that basically tells you what you need to be doing and at what level you need to be practicing in order to get from one level to another in terms of your proficiency. So again, the reading section here, close to an hour. You see component features and component sections with the number of questions per component section outlined as well. There's the writing section as well. And finally, the speaking, which we will talk about here in a moment. So here we are. This is the important part for our conversation today. A lot of the times there are other sections of what we're discussing here that we focus on in other sessions, but this here is another important slide. What you're looking at are the CELPIP webinars, most of which are offered monthly. So this is where test takers can sign up for any one of them on our website. They're very interactive. There's typically an instructor who will ask questions and provide opportunities for practice. And then test takers can also ask these questions throughout the session. The general overview is a look at the features and format of the full CELPIP test. And the reason why we're even looking at this is so that you can start understanding what we suggest in terms of how you prepare and what steps you take. So Listening and Reading Pro, for instance, would go through each part of the listening and reading tests and provide strategies for approaching these different types of questions. Writing Pro and Speaking Pro are divided into Target 5 sessions. Target 5 is that level that we saw earlier in the slide deck, CLB concordance and CELPIP level concordance. And Target 9+ sessions are obviously the ones that basically give you an opportunity to practice to get to level 9+. And this is all because some test takers are looking for a level 5, and many others are looking and hoping to get at least a 9. The information provided about the writing and speaking tasks in these sessions applies to everyone, no matter what level they're aiming for. So it is a great practicing tool that you're doing live in an interactive way. So everyone is welcome to attend, but the main difference is that Target 5 sessions present sample responses at around level 5, and the Target 9+ sessions present sample responses at around level 9. This is important because we're going to go now and look at what this looks like and how you can analyze what level you're at and how you need to go from one level to the other. Excuse me. What you're looking at is what we call the score comparison chart. The first thing I'll mention here is a very interactive. So it's located on our celpip.ca website. In prepare, there's a drop-down menu that says prepare for CELPIP, and I think it's the second one down. Basically, it visualizes the different levels and can detect the differences in proficiency that will help you move up as you prepare for your test. It's available to everyone on our website. It's also available to test prep providers and teachers, because it is probably one of the most comprehensive tools that we're aware of that effectively puts everything together and allows you to analyze what individual responses look like. So for each level of speaking and writing, you'll find a list of skills required to achieve that level. You'll also find 2 sample responses and then a detailed analysis of how those responses demonstrate the required skills. It's important to keep in mind that there are many ways to achieve the same CELPIP level. However, the responses in the score comparison chart were chosen as strong representative examples of each level. And so it becomes like a resource that will allow you to notice specific ways that fluency, complexity, and let's say listenability increase from level to level, and to get to a better understanding of what raters are looking and listening for. I will say this as well. So on the website, on the page itself, you'll see a couple of sections. The first part we call the extended level descriptors, which are a lot of big words that just mean it's a list of elements that a typical test taker at that level would be able to achieve in each of the skills that we rate. This is the table that you see here on the right of the screen, and it is downloadable in PDF and downloadable, of course, directly on the website. It's a lot of information. You don't necessarily need it. You can always refer back to it if you ever receive the score and you wanted to find out, let's say you do a practice test, which I will show you in a moment, and you receive a score from that. And then you want to understand exactly what that means for your own level of proficiency. Well, you can refer to that big downloadable chart that outlines everything in great detail. A lot of folks, however, would prefer to do the other thing, and that is starting from level M and going all the way up to level 12. There are a number of interactive sample responses with analysis. And so for both speaking and writing, you will see or hear sample responses from real test takers directly in the chart below. In other words, you can see, for instance, that you go and you start exploring a particular section for, let's say, speaking, the speaking component. And you go and say, I think I'm at level 8, or I received a score and I'm at level 8. So the analysis in that particular section would give you an indication of how a person, just like you, achieved that score. It is divided the same way that the score chart is divided and that the rating scale is divided, which is going to be by 4 dimensions: content coherence, vocabulary, listenability or readability, and task fulfillment. And if you've attended any of our sessions, or if you're familiar with, or if you're thinking about attending one of the webinars I outlined earlier, you will talk about these 4 dimensions a lot. So as you prepare for the test, you'll understand the importance of each one of them. You'll be able to see how one interacts with the other, but most importantly, you'll be able to find individual ways to increase each one of those components for the level that you're at. Again, it's important to not only download the score descriptors themselves. I would encourage everyone to literally go level by level through here and understand what it takes like really visualize what it takes a level 8 to become a level 9. Because with the earlier slide that I showed you, once you understand the level that you're in and the level that you want to achieve, there are so many particular pertinent products and webinars that are actually going to get you there, that it doesn't take long for you to increase your proficiency in those. Importantly, and this is a hot tip from me, sometimes you achieve a higher level just by scoring enough on 3 of the 4 dimensions. So the dimensions I mentioned a moment ago, so you're talking about task fulfillment, listenability, readability, content coherence, and vocabulary. If you, for instance, scored high on 3 of those, in other words, if you found yourself working, let's say, in a particular area and kind of only developing that skill set, it may still be enough for you to move from one level to the other. In other words, this is also a great tool of confidence building. You begin to realize that there's a lot that you can do, and you don't have to focus on every single component of those features of speech, that there is a lot that gets you prepared to go from one level to the other. But the point here is that this score comparison chart and how interactive it is, it gives you a very pertinent idea of where you are and what you need to do in order to get to the next level. Again, on CELPIP.ca, the section pertaining to preparing for the test, I think it's the second one from the top, and just play with it. It's an incredible tool that allows you to always reference back and forth where you are and where what tools and webinars would be useful for your own particular journey. I've moved to showing you how, once you register for the test or you create an account on CELPIP.ca, what is the next step that we suggest you do, and that is get a practice test. It's completely free. It allows you to understand where you are in relation to your own language ability. And my suggestion would be, once you do this, go directly to the score comparison chart and start playing with the various levels and understanding what other responses have looked like at that particular level that allows you to then work on your proficiency and keep growing. From there, again, once you create a registration, you get access to the CELPIP Accelerate Starter. Videos, quizzes, practice questions, 5 hours for the CELPIP General, which is, again, the test that assesses all 4 components, and 2.5 hours for the CELPIP General LS, again, the shorter version of CELPIP that is accepted for citizenship applications. We already saw the wealth of webinars that we suggest for each individual level, and those are very interactive and very specific. But this particular YouTube channel is actually a super useful place for you to kind of dive deeper into live streams, usually run 2 to 3 times a month on YouTube, watching episodes live and interacting with presenters, and obviously having recordings of each of those episodes. And once you go there, you'll see that they're very specific to individual practices that folks have curated. Super helpful. Again, I will put all of this together in a little visual at the end of this presentation so you know where they situate, where we situate them in how we think of a full-scale preparation for folks. But an incredible resource, as well as, again, on our YouTube channel, tons of study tips in addition to the webinars. And you can effectively utilize those in 5-minute intervals. Again, this is where, when we tell you you're at a particular level, depending on a score comparison chart, how do you go from level 8 to level 9? Sometimes it could be as 5 minutes per day. As long as you're keeping a steady practice routine, all of these study tips are there, and you can see that they are divided into introduction, listening, reading, speaking, writing. So again, it's all there. You don't have to think about where else you could potentially practice. What is it going to take to go from one level to the next? Consistency is key, and that's a fantastic resource to do that. That's actually probably one of my favorite resources, because in conjunction with something I'll show you at towards the end of our presentation, we often think of test prep as something that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of studying, a lot of apprehension associated with, am I doing the right thing? Am I availing myself of the right resources? But it's actually much simpler than that, particularly when it comes to English language or language acquisition. We have developed the tools. They're there. You could literally just like take a break from work or whatever you're doing and just practice 5 minutes per day. No stress. And confidence builds as you go along in a very authentic way. There is also the CELPIP official podcast for those of you who are into this. In other words, if you wanted to play it in the background and start finding ways that, again, in conjunction with the comparison chart and knowing the individual requirements that raters look for at each particular level, these here will give you another way to practice the skills that we have outlined in the comparison chart, as well as download transcripts if that's your thing as well. Now, for those of you who have gone through all of the various prep materials that are available to you for free, but let's say you need to go from level 11 to level 12. Let's say you are required to present a skill set in English for a particular designation that is much higher than what you could potentially achieve just by virtue of listening to podcasts. There is a great deal of resources available to you if you decided to purchase some of those. As you can see, the CELPIP practice test, there's 11 tests, 11 sets with 2 tests each. 1 test in each set contains sample speaking and writing responses at multiple levels. There's instant results for the listening and reading test, which I think is super critical, as well as writing and speaking performance standards. Again, all tied to what I was showing you earlier. See, if you're painting a picture in your mind right now, everything is tied along the CLB, CELPIP levels from M to 12, as well as at every level, there are specific writing, speaking performance standards. So all of that combines, and we kind of align everything together so that you know exactly where you are at every stage of the journey. Finally, ebooks, which I am a big proponent for those personally, because they, for some reason, align with my particular style of learning. The style guide, RW and LS, includes test strategies, a complete practice test for each skill, online component for the listening sections, as well as the CELPIP Common Errors is probably one of the best tools that we hear from teachers and prep providers. Literally dispels any myths when they teach these courses. In other words, for folks that are interested in getting from, again, one level to the other and would retain, let's say, the services of a language course, the CELPIP Common Errors is the book that even teachers use to dispel some of the common myths associated with language use and what, again, raters look for when they assess these. So very deep dive into the content, alongside CELPIP Focus, which are self-guided study, interactive PDFs, and a lot of skill building activities and practice questions. What I'm outlining here is just a full comprehensive outline of everything that we have and all the resources that we suggest you use. The latest one, and one of my favorites, is I keep saying, you can just tune into CBC. You see, for folks that are already in Canada, for instance, and already engaged in speaking on a daily basis, just having this in the background makes a big difference. Having this in the background and maybe going and availing yourself of some of the individual practice sessions that I was showing you earlier, those 5-minute sessions, that may well be enough to get you from one level to the next within time and within reason. And finally, this is where it all comes together. Everything that we have talked about, from getting started and creating an account on CELPIP, the first thing we suggest to you is go to one of the CELPIP General Overview sessions. From there, you have access to 2 free online practice tests. Once you do those, go to the Score Comparison Chart. The most comprehensive tool that gives you an exact idea of where you are on your learning journey, what raters look for when they grade those answers in a very interactive way. You can go through it, and at every stage of the journey, keep coming back and realizing where you are and what the analysis of that particular level tells you in terms of where you need to go next. And as you can see in the little chart here, you can go a number of ways. You can go to all of these ways, and the only element here that is not free is that additional CELPIP study material section that I just outlined at the very end here. Everything else is there for you. Everything else is effectively really well curated in a comprehensive way that gets you to the score that you need. And so with that, the slides that I would really pay attention to here is definitely this one, the score comparison chart. Obviously, going to the website, celpip.ca, prepare for CELPIP, and just doing a deep dive at every stage whenever you feel like you need to really understand where you are and where you need to be. And then also understanding very clearly that everything CELPIP does, the way CELPIP is scored, is a very clear alignment with the CLB, or the Canadian language benchmarks, which are also which is the very tool, the very benchmark that IRCC uses to assess your applications. So with that, I hope that you'll find a lot of these tools very useful. I certainly have in my own journey, as you can detect a little bit of an accent. I'm still working in some respects when it comes to language acquisition, but this is all good stuff, and it's curated by good people who are very much vested in your success. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words on this. And Riley, back to you.
First off, thank you so much, Ivan. Jam-packed with a ton of useful information, as always, and we really appreciate your time. So on behalf of CanadaVisa, and I'm sure everyone in the chat watching, thank you. We're going to move on now to the question and answer period. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. Please, if you have follow-up questions about something about a response that Ivan gives, put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring chat, and so we can ask follow-up questions, even in the question and answer period. Great. So once again, remember that we're going to record this webinar, and we're going to send it to you in a follow-up email. So if you want to rewatch one of these amazing sections, you'll have the opportunity to do so at a later date. We're also going to send you the slides. But yeah, let's start with this question. I think Ivan, from Olu. Olu asks, can I take the CELPIP test outside of Canada?
Yes, you can. And in fact, I will go back, if I may, to the map of where CELPIP is available. But absolutely, yes. I mean, the majority, I wouldn't say that, probably 50% of our candidates do take the CELPIP outside of Canada. And let's see if this is coming to, but the point is, Yes, that's a short yes. The best way to find the availability for testing locations worldwide is celpip.ca. It's easy to find. And there's probably 150 plus locations at the moment and growing. So great question, because I would keep coming back and checking for new locations regularly.
Yeah, and what's the best way to check is on the CELPIP website, right?
Yeah, I will put this in the chat here. I try to go back to the actual map, but I didn't realize that we had moved a long way away. So 1 second here.
Go back. Okay.
Yeah, we can move on to the next question, and I'll just plug it into the chat here.
Great, sounds good. So here we go. Sorry, 1 second here, just pulling out the question sheet.
Sure. And here, let me know, folks, if you can see the 3 links I've posted in the chat in the meantime. One is the actual comparison chart, which, as you can tell, I'm very fond of. The other one is the reference to RCC and the Canadian language benchmark, which is also important. And the third one is, where do we test?
Great. So question here from Johnson. Johnson asks, how is the reading test marked?
I think maybe perhaps the question is about who marks the reading test, because there's 2 components. One is, if you go to the comparison chart and read sample reading responses at every level, you'll see the explanation and the analysis for what constitutes level 7, 6, whatever. But the point is that they're all marked by human raters, subject matter experts, typically 2 of them. And whenever folks don't agree on a particular score, there's a 3rd rater that is brought in. So it's done in a way by folks who are exceptionally proficient in all of these areas. But the important thing here to, I think, also mention again is, in order to understand what a particular score means for reading, writing, whatever, go and see the answers that others have provided and read the analysis of what those raters are looking for, those human raters are looking for in each particular answer.
Right. Ilham asked a great question here that just came in. In the CELPIP language component, administered through a computer-based format, are candidates granted permission to take handwritten notes by listening to the audio recordings?
That's a good question. I know most candidates would take notes directly within the platform, like it gives you an opportunity to take notes with a computer. I'm going to say that that's probably all computer-based. So in other words, you do have an ability to take notes directly on the screen, but not pen and paper.
Right. Nadim asks, I think we get this question every single time. How much is accent and pronunciation a factor when evaluating the speaking portion of the exam?
And that's probably yes, you're right. We do get that question. It's probably one of my favorite questions. And the answer that I've received, because as you can tell, I'm one of those people with the accent, the answer I've received and the answer that I think all of the raters are trained to perform is, it's important to focus on intonation. It's important to focus on listenability, which is one of those features that we discussed earlier. Again, comparison chart, you can listen to what that actually means. And accent is not nearly as important as intonation, listenability, cogency of speech, as it were. In other words, if you have a thought, just say a sentence and finish the sentence there. The accent is probably just a feature of speech that nobody that it doesn't necessarily factor into the rating of responses.
Right. Sophia asked this question on the submission form. Sophia says that they'll be taking the CELPIP exam this month and would like lectures to help her prepare for the exam.
So I would say maybe avail yourself of all of the free resources first, because there's a lot that you can already do on your own, as well as there's some self-paced study materials, some of which we outlined in the last few slides, particularly, let's say, the focus ebooks as well. Like, these are very self-paced resources. But if you need better, more rigorous kind of preparation, there are a number of language courses that, depending on where you are, the jurisdiction that you are, there may be even free resources that you can enroll in. But I would say first order of battle is go through all of the free resources, because they effectively amount to an actual course. There's a lot there, and again, even test providers and teachers would look at some of those and use them in the classroom setting.
Great. A lot of good questions just came in, so I'll try to address them in orders that make sense. Banu Priya asked, and Sintayehu asked, when should I start? How much in advance of the test should I start preparing and studying?
And that's another one of those amazing questions. In my case, so how do I say this? Depending on, and I keep referencing the score comparison chart at this point, because if you take a sample test and you diagnose the level that you're at, you can detect immediately what you need to do in order to go from the level that you need to be. In other words, if you're aiming for a level 5 and you already have the ability to speak in a daily conversational setting, then you probably need a month or two. But if you are at a level 5 and you're looking to achieve 7+, which in most cases for our RCC would be the requirement, then the short answer is you can start as long as or as early as you possibly can. And the last component to this would be, if, let's say, if you are listening, for instance, to CBC News, which is one of the resources that we outline here, you're already kind of training. That's the important part. Like, don't feel apprehensive about the fact that this has to be a super rigorous process. The CBC, along with the little 5-minute tips that we outlined earlier, that's already training. So start as early as you possibly can, but also don't discount the fact that if you're listening to some of these for 5 minutes per day, you're already training.
Right. And some more great questions came in, guys. Please be patient. We're going to get to as many as possible. And yeah, we're writing them down, so keep those questions coming. Kelly asked a great question. They said that reading and listening they have issues with, or they find it the most difficult. Do you have any good tips for the reading and listening portion?
Yes. So, and again, I don't mean to reference the comparison chart, but my tips would be around the once you see where you are with, when you say you have difficulties, it may be useful to understand, again, when you're looking at individual sample responses, that's why we've put them together. This will help you understand or articulate your difficulties. In other words, what's happened to me sometimes is I'll be like, this is just difficult, but I don't know exactly why it's difficult and what I can do to make it less difficult. I think the first step would be to identify those areas that need improvement. And the second step would be just go to the webinars that we have outlined already, because you're not alone. Everyone that attends these will find individual tips and tricks from people who are either developing the tests. Oftentimes, also on these webinars, there are folks who have taken the tests as well. they would share a very similar experience. So in terms of answering the question specifically, first for me would be identifying or breaking down what you mean by challenges. Is it a matter of listening comprehension necessarily? If that's the case, then the answer is more CBC, basically.
Great. So Gabriel asked, what is the valid duration? So how long is a CELPIP test result valid for?
It's valid for 2 years, which is, again, a great thing because for 2 years, you effectively have the ability to send results to IRCC, a number of designating organizations and associations that may be very important for that particular field of work that you are trying to immigrate to Canada for, as well as the SDS if you are interested in a study permit. So 3 very tangible avenues, 2 years of expiry date.
Great. Samson asked, well, Samson is a native language, so a native English language speaker. They live in Ghana. Do they have to write a test before coming to Canada? And I think we know the answer. But do you have any tips for people that are native English speakers when they take this exam? Is it a walk in the park? What should they do?
It can be. It's hard to answer this question because we get that question all the time. We even get it from immigration lawyers, for instance, who are consulting folks from various places where English is, their first language. And the reality is that it can be a walk in the park, depending on the level that you need to achieve. So in other words, if you're aiming for a 7, which is what most IRCC pathways would require, then chances are you're already there. But I would still encourage even native language speakers to do a practice test in the very least. And the reason for it, it's free. The last thing you want to do is go spend the money and take a test and not achieve the result that you want. And the reason why you may not achieve the result that you want is so that the format is not what you thought or expected. So in the very least, take a practice test, familiarize yourself with the format, attend perhaps a webinar, and know what to expect. If folks have a potential of not scoring as well as they would if they're a native language speaker, I would think that it would come down to the format and the expectation on test date. So get that understood first and go from there.
Great. Charity asks, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but I think I do. Is this test approved for the caregiver route that's soon to be introduced?
You're right. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, so I think the answer is yes. But if you have these, does CELPIP have a page on your website where it sort of explains which immigration programs and things that CELPIP is valid for?
So there is a page that explains, and I think we've shared it earlier. It explains all of the associations and designations that CELPIP is accepted for. But I would probably think that maybe IRCC would be a better resource for that, because particularly when it comes to the CLBs, and there's like at least 3 pathways outlined on the IRCC website, CELPIP is clearly identified there.
Right. I thought this was a good question. Jarib asked, what other opportunities does a good language skill result open up for you other than just immigration?
That's a fantastic question. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, so there's the immigration pathway, but the second thing is a study permit. So in fact, so this is my personal take on things. The way I would study for any language test is I would aim to achieve a score that's as high as possible, even though this particular one is not necessarily academically inclined. It still will teach me at level 12 what a very proficient English speaker what the skill set of a very proficient English speaker would entail. which means that not only am I going to be able to apply for a study permit if I am from a country that is approved by the SDS pathway, and again, there's a full list of countries on that website. So that would be one thing that I would want to explore. But increasingly what we're hearing and seeing here in Canada and elsewhere is that a lot of employers are also looking to evaluate English language proficiency. Increasingly, even in the onset of AI, there's a focus on good communication skills because they also outline a greater deal of IQ and EQ. I think, not to wax lyrical here, but I think language is one of those things that allows us to grow as humans and create different neural pathways. So I love the question. I don't know whether I'm providing a cogent response, but the opportunities for a proficient speaker can only grow because, again, in the workforce nowadays, there's a greater and greater onus and importance being paid on folks who are coming in. So it may be a fantastically trained MBA grad, but that language proficiency is the thing that's going to create the connection between a fantastic Tableau data set and a meaningful presentation in the boardroom.
Yeah, awesome. Great. I guess we'll end on this question. How does the audience get started? Where do they go to begin this journey?
CELPIP.ca. So CELPIP.ca, even if you don't create an account, there are already free resources that you can dip your toe in, as the saying goes. But I would encourage everyone to just create an account. Again, CELPIP.ca, create an account, and you get access to all the resources that we've aligned today, the free ones. You don't even have to necessarily, I think you have to register for a test date when you get a bunch of other resources as well, but that will be the way to go. Consult the slide deck here and look at the pathway that we've outlined from registration through prep materials and webinars, deciding where to go at which point. Don't be overwhelmed by that. Listen to podcasts and score highly and come to Canada and help us move this wonderful country ahead.
Awesome. All right, chat. Some logistics before we close out this webinar. Today's webinar is recorded. It'll be sent to you by email in roughly 24 hours. You're going to get those amazing slides and links also in that email. So please look out for it. We'll get it in a day. Thank you for your wonderful questions. We had fantastic questions today. We're excited for the next opportunity for us to do this. And then Ivan, on behalf of CanadaVisa, and I'm sure everyone that joined today, big thank you for all the information that you've shown us, and always a pleasure to do this.
Indeed, always a pleasure. Thank you, folks, and thanks for everyone. Incredible questions, very engaging session. Always grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks, Ivan. Thank you, chat.